You never expect your child to betray you with a smile. It doesn't happen like in the movies. There's no shouting match, no slammed doors, no dramatic orchestration. Sometimes it happens while you're holding a casserole dish, standing in the kitchen you help them pick out tile for, realizing you're the only one in the room who feels out of place. Caleb didn't even look up when I walked in. "Just put it anywhere, Mom," he said. Not cruel, not warm, just mechanical, like I was an afterthought. A background extra. The words hit me like a cold breeze through a cracked window, unexpected, unwelcome, but somehow familiar. The worst part wasn't what he said. It was how easy it was for him to say it. I stood there for a beat longer than I should have, holding the glass casserole dish, careful not to spill the layered spinach lasagna I'd made from scratch. The kind Caleb used to beg me for when he came home from college. Back when he still had time to talk to me about nothing at all. Back when I was someone he sought out, not someone who just showed up and waited to be noticed. "Anywhere's fine," he added, glancing past me at Lila's parents, who were seated neatly at the dining table with glasses of Pinot and folded cloth napkins on their laps. Her mother, all silk and polish, offered a toothy grin in my direction. Her father was already deep into a story I wasn't invited to hear. I set the dish down on the counter gently, as if the contents might still matter to someone. No one offered to help. No one even acknowledged it. It was a meal with no home. The room smelled like rosemary chicken, warm bread, and something floral, probably Lila's new diffuser. It used to smell like soy candles and takeout boxes, back when Caleb first moved in. He called me to help decorate the space, and I'd showed up with paint swatches and cleaning gloves. I remembered how proud he was of the cheap coffee table we found at a thrift store. Now everything gleamed. Glass, chrome, stone countertops. Beautiful. Cold. I backed out slowly and made my way toward the patio door. No one followed. No one asked where I was going. Outside, the night was brisk but quiet. String lights were draped across the yard like glowing garlands. They illuminated a few wicker chairs and a fire pit that hadn't been lit. I sat on the edge of one chair, still half holding my purse in my lap, unsure if I'd even been meant to stay for dinner or just deliver a dish like some glorified food courier. Inside, laughter burst from the dining room, and I heard someone toast. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught enough to know the celebration was in full swing. Toasting their future. Toasting new beginnings. I didn't hear my name. Not once. That was the moment. The precise second it all clicked into place. I wasn't part of this life anymore. Not in the way I thought I was. Not in the way I'd built everything around for the last 30 years. It wasn't anger that stirred inside me. Not yet. It was something heavier. Heavier than grief, even. A slow, suffocating realization that I had become expendable. The woman who had wiped his nose, packed his lunches, stayed up during college finals to send him encouraging emails, the woman who worked extra hours at the bookstore just to afford his tuition gap one semester, had somehow become an errand. A formality. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap like a guest waiting for a cue to leave. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingers. Not fast. Just loud. A quiet drumbeat of awareness. After about 10 minutes, I slipped inside. No one looked up. I walked back into the kitchen, retrieved my purse from the hook by the door, and stood there for a moment. It hit me how many parts of this house had my fingerprints on them. The silverware drawer I organized. The frames on the wall I helped hang straight. The curtain rods I climbed a ladder to install while Caleb held it steady. I wondered if he even remembered. Back in the car, I sat in the driver's seat with the keys in my lap. The streetlight above cast a pale blue wash across the dashboard. The engine was off. So was the radio. All I could hear was the echo of my own thoughts. And they weren't angry. They were clear. Crystal clear. He doesn't see me anymore. Not as a mother. Not even as a person. Just as someone who used to matter. I stared at my phone for a few seconds before unlocking it. My contacts list hadn't changed in years. I scrolled past names I hadn't called in ages. And then I saw it. Martin Law, estate planning. I hadn't spoken to Martin since Jack died 8 years ago. He'd helped with the living trust and medical documents back then, when everything felt too big and too uncertain. I saved his number under for later.
Well,
Later had finally come. I tapped the call button. The ring sounded louder than usual in the stillness of the car. Martin Law Offices, how may I help you? Hi, I said, straightening my voice. This is Evelyn Langston. I'd like to schedule a consultation to update my will. Of course, Ms. Langston. Any specific changes in mind? I smiled, not the kind that reaches your eyes, but the kind that seals something tight inside. Yes, I said. I've changed my mind about everything. Before we continue, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Before the wine glasses and the silence, before the cool smiles and clipped responses, Caleb used to look at me like I hung the moon. He was my only child, my late-in-life miracle. After 3 miscarriages and a diagnosis that left me hollowed out with the words, unlikely to conceive, I'd made peace with the idea that I'd never become a mother. Jack and I grieved quietly. We filled our lives with books and road trips and long dinners with friends. It was a good life. Not the one we dreamed of, but good. Then came Caleb. I was 41, cautious, and terrified for 9 straight months. I remember holding my breath every time I went to the bathroom, every time I had a cramp, every time the doctor was late to walk into the room. But he came. Healthy.
pink, loud.
When they placed him in my arms, I wept so hard the nurse asked if I was in pain. I wasn't. I was just finally full. From the moment he was born, my life rearranged itself around him like the solar system does around the sun. Everything orbited Caleb. Jack joked that I was too soft on him, that I would spoil him rotten with my attention. But he never stopped me. He saw how fiercely I loved that child, and in the quiet corners of our home, when Caleb was asleep, he'd wrap his arms around me and say, "You were made to be a mom." Jack passed when Caleb was only 12. A sudden heart attack in the middle of a parent-teacher conference. One minute we were discussing Caleb's algebra scores. The next, I was screaming into a phone for an ambulance that came too late. That was the year I learned how grief can live in your bones. I didn't know how to be a single mother, much less a grieving one. But I made it work. I went back to teaching full-time. I canceled our cable and picked up tutoring sessions in the evenings to make ends meet. I sold Jack's car to cover Caleb's braces. I packed his lunches every morning, always cutting the sandwich diagonally like he liked. I wrote notes in Sharpie on his napkins. "You've got this. Don't forget, you're amazing. Love you more than jelly beans." Sometimes he kept them. I'd find them folded and stuffed in the pockets of his hoodies when doing laundry. We were close. Not just mother and son. We were a team. He told me everything. First crush. First bad grade. First heartbreak. He cried in my arms at 14 when a friend betrayed him. I didn't say, "I told you so." I held him until he fell asleep on the couch, his hair damp with tears and sweat. When he got accepted into Stanford, we both cried. I remember the way he'd tackle me in the kitchen, lifting me clean off the ground, even though he'd just started lifting weights that semester. "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom," he whispered, face pressed against my shoulder. He never had to say it, but he did. That meant something. I sold the antique silver set Jack's mother had given me when we got married to help pay for Caleb's dorm essentials and travel. He told me he didn't want me to. I did it anyway. I watched him drive away that August morning, his little car stuffed to the roof with bedding and ambition. He waved from the rearview mirror, and I stood on the porch until I couldn't see him anymore. Every Sunday, we had video calls. He'd tell me about classes, professors, a girl he liked. He called when he needed help booking a flight, when he burned a grilled cheese, when he got food poisoning and was too embarrassed to go to the health center. And every time he called, I answered. No matter the hour. No matter the day. After college, he moved to Chicago for a job in finance. "Just for a few years," he said. "Then maybe back home." He called less. The video chats turned into texts. The texts turned into emojis. I told myself it was just life. Busy schedules. New city. New friends. When he brought Lila home for the first time, I was thrilled. She was poised, beautiful, articulate. But even then, there was something distant in the way she looked at me. Like I didn't quite fit. Like I was a sweet relic of Caleb's past she'd tolerate but never fully embrace. Still, I tried. I learned how to make her favorite dessert. I complimented her taste in decor. I offered to help them house hunt. And when they found the one they loved, an overpriced modern two-bedroom with a balcony and no pantry, I co-signed the loan to help them out. Not because they asked, but because Caleb looked at me with that same boyish "please, Mom" expression he used to wear when asking for a second cookie. How could I say no? I wanted to believe we were still close, that I still mattered, that I wasn't just useful but wanted. But little by little I noticed the shift. The calls came less frequently. The plans got changed last minute. The holidays turned into quick dinners instead of long visits. Lila began speaking for both of them. We're just swamped right now. We've got a tight schedule. Maybe next month. I told myself it was temporary. That newlyweds are busy. That jobs are demanding. That I shouldn't be so sensitive. But sensitivity is just love with nowhere to go. And now, sitting in the car outside their house with the chill of the evening clinging to my coat, I could feel all of it catching up to me. Not in a wave. In a slow, steady tide. I wasn't angry. I was aware. I pulled out my planner from the side compartment, flipped to an empty page, and wrote 3 words in careful cursive. Change the will. Then, without checking my reflection, I started the car and drove home. It started with a teacup. A simple thing, really. Porcelain with tiny blue flowers etched along the rim, chipped near the handle. I found it in the back of a cabinet while searching for the box of baking soda I kept for cleaning drains. I hadn't used the cup in years. It belonged to a set Jack gave me on our 10th anniversary, the same year Caleb was born. We used to sit on the porch and drink tea from those cups in the early mornings before the baby cried or the day demanded anything from us. I held it in my hands that afternoon, alone in my kitchen, and just stared. So much of my life had become functional, efficient, colorless. I brewed coffee in bulk and poured it into a thermos. I ate over the sink. I washed the dishes before they ever piled up because there was no one left to make a mess. But something about the teacup made me pause. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for the mug with the cracked #OneMom print. I didn't microwave leftovers or check my phone. Instead, I boiled water, steeped my favorite Earl Grey, and sat down at the kitchen table. Alone. On purpose. I wrapped my fingers around that little cup like it held more than just tea. Like it held a piece of me I had forgotten existed. And it did. The house was quiet, but not sad. Just still. I listened to the tick of the old wall clock, the distant whir of the refrigerator. Outside, the wind nudged the branches of the sycamore tree against the window pane, soft and rhythmic. That was the first time I realized I had stopped living like someone with a future. I'd become a placeholder in my own life. Everything in the house still revolved around Caleb. Photos of him in every room. His childhood drawings still on the fridge. His graduation tassel hanging from a cabinet knob like a forgotten party favor. I hadn't updated a thing in years. Not because I was sentimental, though I was, but because it never occurred to me that I was allowed to change the space, to take it back, to make it mine again. I finished my tea and stood, letting the warmth in my chest settle into something deeper than comfort. Resolve. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I rearranged the living room. I started small, moved the armchair closer to the window, rolled up the rug to vacuum the floor underneath. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I pulled old frames off the wall, portraits of Caleb at various stages, most of them stiff with school photo smiles, and wrapped them in tissue. I placed them gently in a box labeled Archive and stored it in the linen closet.
Not gone.
Just not staring at me anymore. I replaced them with art, paintings I'd tucked away years ago, ones I used to love before everything became about preserving the past. A sun-drenched coastal village. A watercolor of roses in bloom. A framed poem by Mary Oliver that once made me cry. I opened the curtains, washed the windows, aired out the couch cushions. And then I lit a candle, not for guests, not to impress anyone, but just because I wanted the house to smell like vanilla and warmth instead of stale silence. It felt like breathing again. Later that week, I found an old notebook in my nightstand drawer. The cover was worn, pages dog-eared and half filled with grocery lists, to-do notes, and once, a scrawled recipe for banana bread in Jack's handwriting. I flipped past all of it until I found a clean page. I sat on the edge of my bed, pen in hand, and wrote, "What do I want?" The question startled me. Not because it was dramatic, but because I didn't know the answer. I hadn't asked myself that in years, maybe decades. I wrote down a few things hesitantly at first. Walk by the river more. Learn how to use the DSLR camera Jack bought me before he passed. Read one new book a month. Paint again even if it's bad. Eat dinner at the table with music. Travel somewhere I've never been. Maybe Maine? Ireland? The list grew. Not with extravagant wishes. Just little pulses of life I'd buried under everyone else's needs. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. Not because anything had been resolved with Caleb. Not because I'd figured out how to fix the chasm between us. But because I'd remembered something important. I existed. Even without him. And that mattered. The next morning I made breakfast, real breakfast. Scrambled eggs with fresh herbs, toast with jam, sliced oranges. I plated it all on my favorite ceramic dish, the one I usually reserve for guests. I played Ella Fitzgerald while I ate, swaying slightly in my chair with each buttery riff. No one else was there. I didn't post a photo. I didn't text Caleb. It was just me, living. Later that day, I picked up the phone and called Martin's office again. "Yes, Ms. Langston," the assistant said cheerfully. "Your appointment's scheduled for next Thursday at 2 p.m. Just confirming, still planning to revise your will." I looked around the living room, at the new arrangement, the soft light pouring in through freshly cleaned windows. "Yes," I said. "It's time." The conference room was smaller than I remembered. Neutral walls. A mahogany table polished, so smooth it looked wet. A clock that ticked just slightly louder than necessary. It had been 8 years since I last sat in that chair, across from Martin, legal pad in hand, grief still raw and wet after Jack's funeral. Back then, I was in survival mode, checking boxes I barely understood. Now I was here by choice. And that made all the difference. The receptionist had offered coffee, but I declined. I wanted my hands free, my head clear. When Martin walked in, he looked just as I remembered, slightly grayer at the temples, same thoughtful eyes behind rimless glasses. He extended his hand warmly. "Evelyn, it's been a while." "Yes," I said, smiling. "It has." We exchanged a few pleasantries. How's retirement? Partial. How's the neighborhood? Quieter. How's Caleb? I didn't answer that one. Then he opened his leather folio and clicked his pen. "So," he said, "you mentioned you want to revise your estate plan. Can you tell me a little more about what's changed?" Everything I thought. But instead I said, "I'd like to restructure my will. Not just the names on the paper, but the meaning behind it." He raised an eyebrow, but nodded slowly. I pulled a folded sheet from my purse. It wasn't a legal document. It was a list, written in my neatest cursive the night before, under the soft glow of the kitchen light. I slid it across the table. This is who I want to honor. Not because I owe them anything, but because they've shown me that love isn't just biology or ceremony. It's consistency, respect. Martin scanned the paper briefly. His eyes flicked up, then softened. "You're sure?" "Absolutely." He didn't question me again. We went line by line through the old documents. The original will, drawn up when Caleb was 21 and still called me twice a day, read like a love letter. Everything to him, with stipulations for Eli if needed. The house, the savings, the jewelry, the life insurance policy Jack left me.
But now?
Now, I wanted to rewrite everything. "I'd like to leave the house to the Transitional Women's Housing Initiative," I said firmly. "They help single mothers restart. I want my home to do more than sit in someone's portfolio." Martin blinked. "That's generous." "It's intentional," I said. "And the jewelry?" he asked. I smiled. My mother's pearls, the sapphire brooch, and Jack's wedding band. I want them donated to the East Side Women's Shelter Auction Fund. They hold a gala every spring. They could do some good there. He nodded as he scribbled notes. I took a breath, then added, "But I want Eli to have something too. He's young now, but I want him to know I never stopped loving him." Martin glanced up. "A trust?" "Yes," I said. "He'll inherit it at 25, only if he completes some form of education. Trade school, college, doesn't matter. But I want him to grow into it, to earn it. And I want my sister-in-law Judith as trustee. She's steady.
Kind.
She won't bend to pressure." "Do you want Caleb listed anywhere?" The room went still. I tapped my fingers lightly on the edge of my chair.
No.
"I don't." Martin didn't blink. He just circled something on his notepad. I remembered the first time Caleb called me Mom in that distant tone. Years ago, at a dinner party with Lila's friends. The way he'd rolled his eyes when I told a story he used to love. The way he laughed when Lila made a joke at my expense. It wasn't hatred. It was erasure. And I had let it go unchecked. Not anymore. Martin asked me a few more logistical questions about medical proxies, funeral preferences, beneficiary percentages. I answered each one calmly, as if I were placing bricks into the foundation of a house I finally wanted to live in. By the end of the hour, the draft was complete. He slid it toward me for review. "You'll have a chance to make revisions, of course. But this reflects everything you've told me." I scanned the document. Every line felt like a reclamation. "Do you want to include a personal letter to Eli?" he asked. I hadn't considered that, but the thought rooted quickly. "Yes," I said. "I'd like to write it by hand." He smiled. "Good. Sometimes the truth needs your handwriting on it." As I stood to leave, Martin walked me to the door. "You know," he said, "most people who come in here angry want revenge. You don't seem angry." "I'm not," I said. "I'm awake." He gave a low laugh. "That might be more dangerous." Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted across the sidewalk, painting long shadows between the buildings. I stood there for a moment, letting the light warm my face. The breeze carried the scent of spring, fresh cut grass, lilacs from the planter boxes, city pavement drying after rain. I wasn't thinking about Caleb, or what he'd say if he found out, or whether he'd care. I was thinking about what I wanted for the rest of my life. It wasn't wealth, or status, or approval. It was clarity. It was legacy with purpose. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the pen was back in my hand. It had been years since I stepped foot in the guest room. Not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. It used to be Caleb's childhood room, later converted into a guest room when he left for college, but really it had become a storage unit with a bed in the middle. Bins of keepsakes stacked in corners. Books I didn't want to throw away, but no longer had shelf space for. Forgotten linens folded and yellowing with time. A closet full of coats no one had worn in years. But now, as I stood in the doorway, something in me said, "This space deserves a second life." "So do you." The light filtered in gently through faded yellow curtains. The kind of light that asks nothing from you, that just arrives. I stared at the dust dancing in the sunbeams, remembering how Caleb used to sit on that bed, headphones on, lost in whatever album he was obsessed with that week. Jack would peek in, shake his head at the volume, and whisper, "It's like living with a herd of buffalo." I smiled at the memory, but I didn't linger. That room didn't belong to Caleb anymore. It was mine now. I spent the next 2 days reclaiming it. I donated the coats, boxed the books, vacuumed behind the dresser. I even pulled up the old beige rug and tossed it without guilt. On a whim, I visited the consignment store downtown and bought a secondhand writing desk, oak, with brass handles that still clicked softly when opened. It smelled faintly of sandalwood and old pencil shavings. I placed it under the window, where the light hit strongest at noon. I opened a drawer and filled it with blank journals, pens, a small sketchbook. It wasn't about becoming an artist or a writer. It was about making room for possibility. The guest room wasn't a waiting room anymore. It was a beginning. I went to the hardware store and picked out a new paint color, soft river green. The woman at the counter tried to upsell me a matching trim, but I declined. "This is enough," I told her. When I came home, I pulled out an old pair of overalls, tied a scarf over my hair, and painted with the windows open. My arms ached by the end of the afternoon, and there were flecks of paint on my skin and even in my eyebrow, but I felt satisfied in a way I hadn't in years. That night, I sat at the desk with a cup of peppermint tea and wrote my first letter to Eli. Not to send, just to say the things I never got the chance to. "Dear Eli, I don't know when you'll read this. Maybe never. But I want you to know something. You are a good boy. Thoughtful, curious, stubborn in the best way. You remind me so much of your grandfather sometimes it makes my heart ache. I'm sorry things have become distant. That's not on you. Life is complicated, and adults are not always as brave or kind as we want them to be. But I love you. That never changed. It never will. I hope one day you grow into the kind of man who chooses love that lifts, not love that diminishes. With love, Grandma Evelyn." I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it in the desk drawer. It felt like planting a seed I might never see bloom, but planting it anyway. Later that week, I ran into Judith at the post office. She looked surprised to see me. "Evelyn," she said, pulling off her sunglasses. "You look different. Lighter." "I feel lighter," I said honestly. "How are you?" We ended up grabbing coffee next door. Sat at a small table under a red awning, sipping lattes and catching up like old times. She asked about Caleb. I didn't give much detail. Just said, "We're in different chapters now." She nodded, not prying. At one point, she reached across the table, hand soft and familiar. "I'm glad you're doing this," she said. "Living for you." I smiled. "Took me long enough." She sipped her drink, then tilted her head. "You should come up to the lake house this summer. A few of us are going. No pressure. Just space. Sunlight. Maybe a little wine, and badly grilled fish." It was the first time in years someone invited me somewhere without an agenda. I said yes. That night, I changed the ringtone for Caleb's contact to silent. Not out of spite. Out of peace. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for a call, a text, a "Mom, I'm sorry." I was done living in the pauses between other people's priorities. The next morning, I opened all the windows in the house and let the breeze sweep through. I brewed fresh coffee, played Nina Simone on vinyl, and sat in my new studio, the room with the yellow curtains and the soft green walls, feeling like I had finally moved back into my own life. And when I looked around, I didn't see absence anymore. I saw space. Space to create.
To grow. To breathe.
It didn't happen all at once. There was no frantic knock at the door. No teary phone call in the middle of the night. Just small, quiet acknowledgments that the dynamic had shifted, and that for once, I wasn't the one bending to keep things whole. The first sign came on a Thursday. I was standing in the middle of the community center's multipurpose room, helping stack folding chairs after a memoir writing class I'd joined 3 weeks prior. A small group of women, mostly retirees like myself, stayed after to chat about books, gardens, and grandkids. We laughed about old library finds and shared recipes for soups that freeze well. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. When I finally checked it an hour later, I saw Caleb's name. Missed calls 1.
Voicemail 1.
Text, "Can you pick up Eli from school today? Lila and I are both stuck at work." No greeting. No context. Just the assumption I'd say yes. Like always. But this time I didn't. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the sun glint off the windshield, and thought about the dozens, no, hundreds, of times I dropped everything for him.
For them.
Rearranged doctor appointments. Left groceries in the cart. Cut church services short. Rushed through dinners. All so Caleb wouldn't feel the inconvenience of coordinating his own child's life. I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear. I texted back.
"Sorry.
I'm not available this afternoon. Hope you're able to find someone." There was no response. Not immediately. Hours later, I checked again. Still nothing. But the next morning, there was a message from Lila. Just a heads up, we're planning a small dinner next weekend. Some of Mark's work friends. We'd love it if you could bring your lemon tart. No, hi Evelyn. No, how are you? No acknowledgement of the missed favor. Just another request. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking the phone and placing it face down on the table. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They weren't asking because they missed me. They were asking because I'd always said yes. Because I was easy to summon. Predictable. Convenient. But I wasn't a support beam in their structure anymore.
I was rebuilding my own.
That Saturday, I spent the morning at the local botanical garden with Judith. We wandered the gravel paths between tall sunflowers and tulip beds, pointing out plants we couldn't name, but admired anyway. We sat on a bench overlooking the koi pond, sipping iced tea and watching dragonflies skitter across the surface. Caleb texted me, Judith said after a long pause. I didn't flinch. What did he say? He asked if I'd heard from you lately. Said he's been meaning to reach out, but things have been crazy busy. She used air quotes, her voice flat. I smirked. He's always been busy. He's starting to notice you're not circling him anymore. I'm not, I said. Judith studied me. You're really done waiting, aren't you? I nodded. I was always afraid that pulling away would make me selfish. But staying small made me disappear. That night, I cooked myself a full meal, rosemary chicken, roasted carrots, a glass of chilled white wine. I sat at the dining table with a linen napkin on my lap and music playing in the background. Not out of loneliness, out of respect for my own presence. Halfway through dinner, the phone buzzed again. This time it was Caleb calling. I let it ring, not out of malice, but because I didn't feel obligated to rush toward the sound of his voice anymore. He left a voicemail. Hey, Mom. I noticed you didn't respond to Lila's invite. And yesterday with Eli, I guess I should have checked first. Things have been crazy, and we thought you might want to come by, catch up. Call me back. He sounded different. Not apologetic, not exactly, but uncertain. Like a man who had lost something he didn't realize he needed until it wasn't automatic anymore. I poured another glass of wine and sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees. The stars were out. The wind was soft. I didn't call back. Not that night. Not the next day either. Instead, I wrote another letter to Eli. This time shorter. Dear Eli, the stars are out tonight and I thought of you. I hope wherever you are, you're noticing the sky too. If you ever wonder what makes someone strong, it's this: knowing when to hold on and when to let go. I'm still learning. Maybe one day, we can learn together. Love always, Grandma. I folded it, sealed it, and tucked it next to the first one in my desk. A small legacy of truth, written in ink that didn't need permission. I didn't plan to attend. When the invitation came, an email from Lila with a subject line that read, Family and Friends Dinner, Saturday at 6 p.m. I deleted it without opening. But then, 2 days later, Judith called. You should come, she said. Not for them. For you. For me? I asked.
Yes.
Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up and let them feel the weight of your absence even while you're in the room. I didn't respond right away, but I thought about what she said for the next 2 days. Saturday morning, I opened my closet and chose the navy blouse Jack bought me years ago, the one I used to wear to parent-teacher conferences and job interviews. Not flashy, just dignified. A blouse that said, I'm not here to impress. I'm here to be heard. By 5:50, I was in the driveway of Caleb and Lila's house. The porch lights were already glowing. Inside, I could see people milling around with wine glasses and polished shoes. I walked in alone. No one greeted me at the door. The entryway looked different. Modern art on the walls, furniture pushed around. No sign of the photo collage I'd helped Caleb arrange years ago. The frame with his kindergarten handprint was gone. The bookshelf full of Jack's old paperbacks I donated? Also gone. In their place, minimalist decor and silence. Caleb spotted me first. Mom, he said, blinking like I was a hallucination. You came. Judith invited me, I said simply. He hesitated before stepping in for a quick, awkward hug that felt more like a formality than a welcome. Lila waved from the kitchen, glass of rose in hand, her smile tight. The guests were mostly from Mark's law firm. Their voices were sharp and confident, heavy with networking.
I didn't know any of them.
And none of them seemed particularly interested in knowing me. Still, I took my seat at the long dining table, quietly arranging my napkin in my lap, listening to conversations about vacation homes, market fluctuations, and some new wellness resort in Arizona. Caleb didn't sit next to me. He sat at the opposite end of the table, flanked by colleagues. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I let my silence be its own presence. Halfway through dinner, one of the guests turned to me and smiled politely. "You must be Evelyn," she said. "Caleb talks about you. Retired teacher, right?" I nodded. 34 years. She raised her glass. "That's wonderful. He says you're the reason he developed such a strong work ethic." There it was. I glanced down the table. Caleb's fork paused midair. I smiled softly. "I used to think so, too." The guest blinked, a little caught off guard. "Well, it's clear you made a big impact." "I did my best," I said. Then I returned to my plate. The air changed after that. Not for the room, but for Caleb. He kept glancing my way, as if trying to measure something he couldn't name. Maybe it was the way I sat straighter now. Or how I didn't try to jump in with stories. Or how I didn't refill his glass or ask about his week. After dessert, people began to drift into the living room for coffee. Lila passed around little plates of chocolates. Caleb approached me near the kitchen island. "Can we talk?" he asked. I set down my untouched coffee.
Now.
He nodded.
Yeah.
"Just for a minute." He led me to the back patio where string lights glowed overhead and the air smelled like wet leaves and firewood. "I feel like you've been distant," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Have I?" He looked at me, searching. "You didn't respond to our texts. You skipped Eli's soccer game. You're not around like you used to be." I folded my arms gently. "I was always around, Caleb. You just stopped noticing." He said nothing. I continued. "I used to think love meant showing up no matter what. Even when I wasn't wanted. Even when it hurt. But I've learned something lately." He waited. "Love isn't supposed to make you disappear." His throat worked around a silent response. "I'm not angry," I added. "But I won't keep shrinking so you can feel tall." He looked genuinely lost for a second. Like a boy again. Like the child who once clung to my leg on the first day of preschool. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Because I kept hoping I was wrong. And when I finally realized I wasn't, I got quiet." "But you still came," he said softly. I looked at the lights overhead, the soft glow catching in the branches.
Yes.
Because sometimes people need to see what distance really looks like. I let the silence sit there between us. He rubbed the back of his neck. "So, what happens now?" I turned to go back inside. "Now you grow. Or you don't. Either way, I'll be just fine." Back at the table, people laughed and chatted like nothing had shifted. But I knew it had. Not with drama. Not with tears. With truth. And the steadiness of a woman who no longer needed to be chosen to know her worth. It was a Thursday morning when the letter arrived. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter. Handwritten. Folded carefully inside a plain white envelope with my name printed in crooked, youthful penmanship. Grandma Evelyn. I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. Eli. I carried the envelope to the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and sat at the table where I used to help Caleb with his math homework. I traced the corner of the envelope for a few moments, letting the weight of it settle in my palm. Then I opened it. "Dear Grandma, I miss you. I know I'm not old enough to understand everything going on, but I wanted to tell you that I remember things. I remember you taking me to the duck pond. I remember your grilled cheese and how you cut the crusts off even when I said I didn't care. I remember falling asleep on your couch and waking up with a blanket on me. I asked Mom why we don't see you much anymore. She said she messed up. She didn't say how, but she said she's trying to be better. I told her I wanted to write you. She didn't say no. So, can I come visit again? Even just for the weekend? I miss your house. And you."
Love, Eli.
I read the letter twice, then a third time. I pressed it flat against the table and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for months. There was no apology in those words, but there was a thread, a connection, a possibility. I stood and walked to the desk in the guest room, my studio now, with its soft green walls and sunlight filtering through the yellow curtains. I opened the drawer where I had placed the other 2 letters I'd written him. I added this one to the stack. Then I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Dear Eli, of course you can visit. The duck pond is still here. So is the couch. And yes, the grilled cheese. But you're a bit taller now, so I may need to make 2. I can't tell you how much it means to hear from you. I'll be here. This weekend. Next weekend. Every weekend you want to come. Love you always, Grandma. I folded it, slid it into an envelope, and dropped it in the mailbox by noon. I didn't call Caleb to confirm. I didn't ask permission. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. That weekend, Eli showed up on my porch with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a smile I hadn't seen in months. Hi, Grandma. I stepped aside, arms wide. Hi, sweetheart. We spent the afternoon baking cookies and watching the same animated movie we used to play on loop. He curled up on the couch like no time had passed. That night, I read him from one of Jack's old storybooks, the same ones Caleb used to fall asleep to. As I turned out the light, he whispered, I'm glad you didn't stop loving me. I paused at the door. That was never even a question. He smiled and drifted off. Sunday morning came too soon. Caleb pulled up outside just as we were finishing breakfast. I opened the front door, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked older. Not by age, by expression, by the weight of awareness. Thank you for letting him come, he said quietly. I didn't do it for you, I replied, just as quietly. He nodded. I'm trying, he added. I know, I said. Trying takes time, and effort, and silence. He looked like he wanted to say more. Maybe he would later. But for now, we just stood there. Then Eli ran out, hugged me around the waist, and climbed into the car. They drove away slowly. I didn't cry. Instead, I went back inside, watered the plants in the windowsill, and placed the framed drawing Eli had made, a lopsided house with a stick figure grandma holding hands with a smaller stick figure boy, back on the mantel. That afternoon, I walked into the studio and pulled out the final version of my will. All signatures complete. Witnessed. Notarized. Final. I reread it, not to double-check, but to remember. The house, to the Transitional Women's Housing Initiative. The jewelry, donated to fund safe spaces for women and children. The savings, converted into a scholarship fund for women returning to school after age 40. The trust, reserved for Eli, with conditions that would help shape him into a man I'd be proud to know. The letters, tucked in a small wooden box labeled, when he's ready. I placed the folder in the fireproof safe and turned the lock. Not out of finality, out of freedom. In the backyard, the roses had begun blooming again. Jack's roses. Delicate, soft pink, determined. I cut a few and brought them into the kitchen. Placed them in the same chipped vase I'd used for decades. The one that had survived every move, every storm, every season. It didn't match anything, but it held beauty anyway. That evening, I sat on the back porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The sky blushed gold and lavender. Wind rustled the branches overhead. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was full of peace, of presence, of purpose. I wasn't waiting for a phone call, or a knock, or an apology dressed in borrowed grace. I had reclaimed something far greater, my life. And with each breath, I could feel it settling back into me, brick by quiet brick. Not revenge, not restoration, just return. She didn't need to burn bridges. She simply stopped building them alone. And in the quiet that followed, she didn't vanish. She began again. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. And remember to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the strength it takes to choose yourself.